lot of people say that we live in this globalised world and that means we're all becoming the same. Everyone's blue jeans, Coca-Cola everywhere you go. I think actually when you scratch under the surface, and philosophy helps you to do this, you can kind of see that the ways of thinking in different parts of the world are still at the moment quite distinctive, and there's still that kind of diversity in the system. Whether or not we're going to all end up thinking the same way down the line, I'm not sure. But my hunch is that these ways of thinking are so deep-rooted in the culture, they're going to change much more slowly than perhaps people's habits about, what they drink and what they eat and what they wear. I'm educated in the Western philosophical tradition. I think it has a lot to offer, but I think it's not aware enough of its own limitations and not aware enough of the way in which it places those limitations on itself. So I do have a certain frustration that we've not been willing enough to look beyond, and I've been as guilty as that as anyone else. Comparative philosophy is defined as the study of philosophy in more than one tradition, essentially, and there's not enough of it that goes on, and most is only in two. And what I'm really trying to do is to try and encourage people to take more interest in other traditions, and realising you don't have to become an expert in them to learn something valuable and important from them. All around the world, people do ask questions about the same things. How do we know what we know? What is the world like? What does it mean to be an individual? How ought we to live? I mean, those are the four questions that I organise the book around. And so they do all ask those same questions, but in a way they ask them in different ways. They have different slants on them, different angles on them. So what's quite useful about doing comparative philosophy is you take a question that you assume is like perennial and everyone asks it, and then you see actually some people address that in a slightly different way, and so it casts a new light on old familiar questions. Well, to write the book, I did read a lot of classical texts and secondary sources, but also I did travel literally around the world, talking to people who are working and living in those countries, and also to get a sense of the culture. Because I want this to be a window not just into philosophy, but into how the world thinks, as the title says. And I felt I couldn't do that if I actually never left my desk and saw some of these parts of the world for myself. I think what people often want to know is, will adopting this philosophy make me happier? What's quite interesting about that is that the very question itself, I think, is something we'd be more inclined to ask in the West than perhaps in other parts of the world. Your personal happiness is seen as really important. Actually, I think in other parts of the world, people will have an idea of a flourishing life, a life well lived, where of course, all other things being equal, it's good to be happy. But that emphasis, that hedonism, if you like, has become much more salient in Western culture than I think it has done in virtually any other philosophical tradition, also in the ancient Western traditions.